Live from Champion Studio in Charleston, South Carolina. Welcome to That's Gotta Hurt Live. Wherever you're watching, hope you're making tonight your masterpiece. My name's Dr. David Geier, orthopedic surgeon, sports medicine specialist, and media medical expert. Whether you play fantasy sports, whether you love to bet on sports, or you just love sports as a diehard fan, I help you understand the injuries of pro and college athletes so you can win your fantasy league, win your bets tonight, or hopefully just enjoy the games more. This is going to be fun. When I started this afternoon, I was saying on my Better Than Ever live show at noon today that I was going to talk Zion, I was going to talk Steph, and hopefully some other things would come up. And it's been kind of an interesting thing, mainly because of the really bizarre allegations in the Antonio Brown saga. So we'll talk a little bit about that. And then I want to hit on this NBA thing. I don't want to talk about COVID and COVID policy, but what's going on with NBA rosters and how crazy it is. There's a great article in ESPN Plus today talking about how much of a just chaos it is with NBA rosters. So I want to talk a little bit about that. As always, I'd love for you to comment. Please share your first name and where you are. If you have specific player injuries in football, basketball, any sports really, feel free to ask or comment on anything we talk about. If you ask questions about your injury, if we have time, I'll try to do that. But remember, nothing I talk about is medical advice, and I am not involved in the care of these athletes. So I am just an analyst giving you insight on these injuries as an orthopedic surgeon and sports medicine specialist. So please understand that. All right, let's start real quickly with Steph Curry. There isn't all that much to talk about. Earlier today, it was revealed he was doubtful or that he might not play due to a quad contusion. Contusion is the fancy medical way. Maybe we get to charge a lot of money by calling it a fancy term like contusion, which is really code for bruise. Basically a bruised quad. Now, that I don't mean to minimize it because that can be very painful and can take a little while to recover. Now, I literally just saw a little while ago, the Warriors have said he is out tonight along with Draymond Green. Now, Curry last night, I want to say it was the third quarter, collided with one of the Mavericks players, Dorian Finney-Smith, and basically took a direct blow to the quad muscle, and that's how these happen. The trick with quad contusions, quad bruises, is the bleeding into the muscle can be very painful, and if it's a lot of blood, it can be really kind of a problem. I doubt his is that way. But I knew all along I was going to be extremely surprised if he played tonight, even if it isn't a really big one, because it was the second night of a back-to-back. And in a guy, that's one thing in a 22, 23-year-old, a little different in a guy that's been in the league as long as Steph Curry has. Always good to be safe. But again, pay attention to this. If you are betting on sports, you may just maybe kind of assume he may be out for a few games. Even Steph says he hopes he's back. Something about mind over matter or something, mind over body. But it's one to kind of keep an eye on, quite honestly. Especially they've got a big lead, not a huge lead, but they're in first place and will likely keep it, especially once Clay comes back likely on Sunday. So I actually see them giving him a few games of rest unless this really is terribly mild. All right, another one that's not acute, but it's worth talking about is Pelicans star Zion Williamson. Great player at Duke. I've loved following Zion's career. I've said it multiple times, I'm a huge Memphis Grizzlies fan, and when that lottery that year and the Pelicans and the Grizzlies and the Knicks and the Lakers, I think that's who it was. That's who it was. Ended up with the four that made the lottery and had a chance at the top pick. And obviously, you go into that draft hoping Zion, because he's a generational talent. Even though I will tell you, I loved Ja Morant in college. I loved that NCAA tournament game. The games that they played, it was Marquette and Alabama, I think. He just dominated then, and I'm going to tell you right now, and I say this not in hindsight bias, where obviously you see how things turn out, I then said Ja Morant was going to be a better fit for us than Zion Williamson is, and it led to the Mike Conley trade and all sorts of picks that we got and all these extra players, and now we went from basically looking at a 5-year rebuild or longer to already in 4th place in the Western Conference with a roster that I think most teams would trade for. Having said that, a roster and draft assets, but having said that, obviously the Pelicans were happy to get Zion. Now, we've heard the stories, right? His camp isn't happy with the team around him in New Orleans, and there's been a lot of talk he wants out. Does he want to play in Atlanta? Does he want to play in New York? Then comes this issue this summer. All of a sudden, it's revealed that he had off-season surgery on his foot. The Pelicans may have known about it. The Pelicans may not have known about it. Now, what he had, we find out later, was a Jones fracture. If you're sort of looking at the top of the foot, this is the outside. The 5th metatarsal is this long bone under the little toe there. And a Jones fracture is a fracture, let me turn it up this way, not so much at the tuberosity where sort of average everyday people tend to break it, especially older people. He broke it where most athletes do at sort of what's called the metaphyseal diaphyseal junction, sort of this flaring area right before it gets to the cylindrical part of the bone, which is bad for a couple reasons. One, has poor blood supply to that region, making it prone to not heal, and there's tension forces pulling it across. So that fracture, if you put it in a cast, very, very rarely heals in an athlete. So you do surgery. Typically, shouldn't have put that away, you typically put a screw down the center of the bone, and then it heals in somewhere 6 to 12 weeks, like what we're seeing with Derrick Henry. And you want to make sure it goes on to heal completely. Sometimes it doesn't, and you end up having to do a revision surgery, either putting a bigger screw down it or something like that. And it looks like that's what happened to Zion. It wasn't healing the way it was supposed to. All of a sudden, didn't start on opening day like people said he would, and then it was longer and longer. Then we find out he went back to Los Angeles. Dr. Richard Ferkel did some kind of injection. He also did the surgery and some biologic treatment to try to get it to heal. I'm almost certain that's some form of PRP, platelet-rich plasma. There may have been some kind of bone protein in it, stem cell type thing to try to get the bone to heal, but they're trying to augment the healing short of doing another surgery. Then a few weeks later, we find out that, x-rays don't look so good, so now we're going to make him partial weight bearing and really scale back his rehab. Really, really worrisome news. I will tell you that as an orthopedic surgeon. I'd be very, very concerned this is headed towards another surgery. And then there's always been sort of the rumors, or he's way overweight. People have speculated who have seen him. He's 320 pounds right now. He normally plays at 270. Is the weight part of the problem? Nobody really knows. Today, what we find out is he's rehabbing in supposedly Portland, Oregon, away from the team. And then it brings back all that stuff about how Zion and doesn't want to be in New Orleans, or doesn't like how the team's managing getting players around him. Maybe he's not happy about who's the medical decisions being made. So that lends credence to there's something going on, you might think. Or is it more that it's just a negative energy around the team? There could be a lot going on here. It is not abnormal, and we're going to talk about this in a second with Antonio Brown. It is not abnormal in pro sports. Yes, very often, especially in the NFL, the team doctors for the team do the surgery. That's just, they're there, the players know them, that's very common. But in this age of players with agents and having marketing deals and all this kind of thing, it's very common for guys to go to other surgeons. We used to hear it all the time with Dr. James Andrews, who was in Birmingham, Alabama, then went to Florida. But people go all over the country to special doctors for various problems. Zion went, even though he's in New Orleans, had surgery in LA with Richard Ferkel, who is a foot and ankle specialist. All completely normal. Occasionally, yes, they will rehab in other places too. Usually that's not what happens, though. The surgeon will do it somewhere else. They come back to the team for their training staff to do the athletic trainers and the physical therapists to do the rehab with the team so the team really knows how everything's going on. This is a little trickier. The Pelicans are saying, hey, we're in touch with him, we know what's going on, but it is a whole lot trickier to manage and know how somebody's doing when the rehab is going on somewhere else. You don't get to see all the exercises he's doing and things like that. This is going to be a really tricky situation. Lots of layers here. Not healing well. Is there good communication between the player and the team and the team's sports medicine staff? Really, really tricky. On top of an injury that is very problematic. Again, a lot of times you put the screw down that Jones fracture, down that fifth metatarsal, heals just fine, no problem. What I'm hoping happens with Derrick Henry with my Tennessee Titans. But if it's not healing well, that can be a big problem. I don't know exactly. I would assume in a guy as big as Zion, they put the biggest screw in there they could. But at what point do you bail and say, take the screw out, do a bone grafting procedure and fix it some other way, or, something like that? You wonder if we're going to hear in a few weeks or in a month that he has to undergo a second surgery. It happens occasionally with those fractures in athletes, but certainly would be worrisome in a guy that big and powerful. So, speaking of bad situations between player and team, all of us saw I was going to say nonsense, but that's not really fair, but all the drama that happened on Sunday in New York, or New Jersey, I guess, at the New York Jets Tampa Bay Buccaneers game with Antonio Brown. Again, he ripped off his jersey during the game, walked off the field, basically no jersey, just shirtless, basically threw up the peace sign and left. And early on, they were speculating, people were speculating, media experts were saying this is some sort of mental health issue, that he's really going through a lot. Then there was some speculation that he was very close to meeting his contract incentives, where he was going to get basically $350,000 for number of catches, yards, touchdowns, and he was so close, and then they weren't playing him, and he was mad about that. Turns out, we find out today, and there may have been hints about this in previous days, that he is alleging the team tried to force him to play despite an ankle injury. Now, he was on their injury report during the week with that ankle injury. The team is saying on Sunday, the day of the game, he never told anybody that his ankle was bothering him. Now it comes out that he's had an MRI that shows bone fragments in the joint, one of the ligaments pulled off the bone, and cartilage damage. He's reportedly scheduled for surgery with Dr. Martin O'Malley, a big foot and ankle specialist at the Hospital for Special Surgery in New York, very prestigious program. He's saying the team tried to force him to see one of their junior foot and ankle doctors. Within a big orthopedic program, there's typically a guy that runs the department, one of the attendings, or a woman, but it's going to be somebody that runs all of it. And then there's subspecialties, so sports medicine, foot and ankle, and there's the head of foot and ankle, and then sort of the people under them. But they all work independently. They're just all in the same section. And he's saying the team tried to get him to see one of the junior guys. I don't know. There's all this back and forth about what he told the team, what he didn't. I saw he's alleging that they tried to give him a painkiller shot that the NFL Players Association has warned people not to do. To me, that sounds like Toradol, which even when I was with the St. Louis Rams, the Rams at that time were using a lot of Toradol. It's a very, very strong anti-inflammatory, typically given as an injection into muscle, so it's usually into the buttock. That's how it was done. And it was basically a painkiller that was given before games to decrease inflammation and to help things not hurt so much, but very associated with stomach ulcers and gastric bleeds, and in theory can cause bleeding in the head if you have a blow to the head that causes bleeding in the brain. There's going to be a whole lot more bleeding if you had the Toradol. So a lot of teams got rid of Toradol. I know the Rams, Matt Matava, the head doctor when I was there, said that they've completely gotten rid of Toradol, at least while they were still in St. Louis. I don't know if Neil Elatrash is using it with the Los Angeles Rams, but a lot of teams have gotten rid of Toradol. It sounds like that's what Antonio Brown is alleging. And that's not illegal. It's just a lot of teams have gotten away from that medication. This is really tricky. The only person that I've seen speak other than at the press conference, Bruce Arians, is the Bucs general manager. But, it'd be very easy if the team doctors or the athletic trainers could talk to the media. I will tell you that you just aren't going to see that. You don't typically. I can only remember one NFL team athletic trainer ever talking at a press conference. And I don't even remember the scenario that happened. I've only seen the team doctors talk occasionally. It's very rare. The teams don't want the medical staff out there and subject to questions from the media generally, not even in this situation, but just generally that's going to be coming from the head coach, and that's why the head coach acts like they don't know anything. They don't want to get any of those questions from the media either because they're not doctors and they don't want to be put in that position, but the teams don't let their medical staff talk. You get issues with patient confidentiality. You got issues with the team sort of keeping information as secret as possible so that other teams don't have a competitive advantage. There's a lot of layers to this. So we're not going to hear from the Buccaneers, doctors, or athletic trainers. But this is a tricky situation, and this happens sometimes where players want to have treatment one way. I mean, it's not common, but this has been alleged for years and years. I wrote about it. I don't have my book next to me. That's Gotta Hurt, the injuries that changed sports forever. But I document cases where players want to do one thing. One of the best examples, and this is the one I wrote about, Michael Jordan in year 2 in the NBA suffered a navicular fracture of his foot. That is this bone right there. Another bone that doesn't heal very well, found on CT scan, missed most of that second season. He was dying to come back. He didn't have surgery, but they put him in a cast for months and months and months. And he used to talk, he'd bring his shoes to the doctor's office, the Bulls team doctor, and the doctor would try to talk him off the ledge, and it was just a mess. He comes out later, was actually playing pickup games at the University of North Carolina where he played in college because he knew his foot was fine, even though the Bulls weren't letting him play. And then when they let him play, they restricted his minutes. He didn't like that, from what research I could do. So this is not new, but it's a really tricky situation. You have to have really good communication between the coaches and the medical staff and the player, and everybody needs to be on the same page. Ideally, that's how a medical staff of a pro team works. Doesn't sound like that happened here. Now, you don't know who to believe. Antonio Brown's had issues at a lot of teams, so it's hard to know. And the players for years have alleged that teams try to get guys to play and not look out for their long-term health. You hear that all the time. I can't really comment if it's true. I will tell you that orthopedic surgeons that serve as the team doctors for these teams, our goal is to do what's best for the player and what's best for them long term and not push them to play. But it is tricky. I'm going to say it is a tricky ethical situation because you want to keep your job as the head team doctor. And if you're repeatedly holding people out longer than the team wants, yes, in theory, they may switch and go with another group. Again, I'm not saying that necessarily happens, but I have no doubt that you feel pressure to get guys back on the field, whether or not you do it. Again, not alleging any wrongdoing, but there's ethical forces where you're having the team doctor who's being hired by the team making decisions. Are they going to side with the team over the player? It's tricky. I'm just saying that. This one, I don't think we're ever going to find a true resolution. I really don't, because there's no reason to. Maybe the NFL investigates it, but that'll be kept quiet. And again, you're not going to hear the medical staff talk. So anyway, just really interesting discussion. And then last, I want to talk about this situation going on in the NBA during the pandemic with the Omicron variant. Literally 10 minutes before we started this live stream, I get a text. Obviously, big Memphis Grizzlies fan. We're playing the Detroit Pistons here in about 40 minutes. On a 7-game win streak, 4th in the West, great team. And this is despite having literally half the team out for health and safety protocols due to the Omicron and COVID-19. And I get a text saying that the head coach, Taylor Jenkins, says that every single one of the Grizzlies players is now off the protocols. Magically, they're all negative and asymptomatic and able to play. Go from 5-6 to 0 in one day is pretty darn amazing. Now, great. I'm super happy about that. Having said that, it has been a mess. This article in ESPN Plus, and if you have access to that, you should definitely check it out, talks about all these teams that are just scrambling to fill holes because they'll have 4 guys out, 5 guys out, and their G League players, they had to suspend the G League season over this Omicron thing. Just teams are just scrambling to sign these guys to 10-day hardship contracts. There's stories of guys that are at the grocery store and they get a call saying, "Hey, can you fly across country tonight to play?" A couple nights ago, it was the Brooklyn game. I forget which game it was the Grizzlies were playing. I think it was Brooklyn. And somebody came in at the end of the game, and I told my small network of Memphis Grizzlies fans, like, who was that guy? I have never, and I read Grizzlies media Twitter, and I keep up with it. I'm like, who was that? And apparently we had just signed him that afternoon. And you read these articles of how teams are having to send the playbook, by email. They're getting it while they're on the plane. And these guys are talking about how in the huddle they're being asked to play, and then the coach calls a play. They have no idea what that play is. I mean, it is an absolute mess. We could have a long discussion. This isn't really a show about infectious disease, but we could have a long discussion about really should we be testing players just routinely? We don't test for colds. We don't test for the flu. But that's a whole other discussion. But I admire, one, that the NBA is trying to push through this and play. I think that would be trickier in the NFL trying to get substitute players. It would be a real disaster. But in the NBA, because as a fan, I want them to play. And I really don't think the risk is that great, quite honestly. But what a mess. If you're a general manager, if you're the athletic training staff, if you're the equipment managers and all that, the coaching staff trying to get playbooks to these guys and incorporate them into the offense, because they're not just sitting on the end of the bench, they're playing. And because so many guys are out, really, really tricky situation. All right, that is all I've got for you. If you have any comments, questions, any injuries you'd like to talk about, certainly send that my way. Otherwise, I'm going to call it a night, have a little dinner, and get ready for my Grizzlies game against the Detroit Pistons. I know you're going to get sick of hearing me talk about the Grizzlies, the Titans, even though I'm not as big of a Titans fan as I am a Grizzlies fan. And when we get into the English Premier League a little bit more, you'll hear me talk way too much about Liverpool. But my college football and basketball team, Wake Forest, the Wake Forest Demon Deacons, where I went to college. We'll probably talk a little bit about that. But I don't expect them to be good. It's one of the smallest schools, certainly the smallest Power 5 school. So we're lucky to even win some games like we did this year in football. But that is all I've got for you. Very, very excited to do this show. I hope you're enjoying it. Remember, send me injuries you want me to talk about on any coming day. I will try to be here tomorrow night. There's a lot of things going on tomorrow night here. But I will try to join. If not, I apologize. And if not, we will be back all next week, 7 p.m. Eastern Time. Thank you so much for joining us for That's Gotta Hurt Live. Take care.